Welcome back to the second day of Scholar Strike Canada teachings. I am Beverly Bain, co-founder of Scholar Strike Canada. Today, we have a series of teachings for you, another exciting day of teachings. We will begin with the fight for divestment, tensions, challenges, and opportunities for radical resistance, followed by poetry reading from Sarah Malik, a Palestinian poet and writer. Then we'll move to anti-Palestinian racism, Islamophobia, and the new anti-Semitism, followed by the repression of academic freedom and the criminalization of dissent and free expression in support of Palestine on university campuses. And we will close with poetry by L. Jones, poet, journalist, author, and abolition activist. Please don't miss any of this today. Bring your students, follow with them, discussions, and yes, a free Palestine. Thank you.
So is it over to me, Beth? I guess so. Yeah, so welcome everyone from wherever you are joining us. The name of this panel is The Fight for Divestment, Tensions, Challenges, and Opportunities for Radical Resistance. So my name is Vincent Wong. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Windsor Faculty of Law in Canada. And I'm a member of the Palestinian Solidarity Committee for the Windsor University Faculty Association. Among other things, I teach in the area of international human rights law and law, migration, and colonialism. I'm speaking to you from Takaranto, now known as Toronto, which in Mohawk means where there are trees standing in the water. And today, Toronto is covered under Treaty 13 and the Williams Treaties. And it is the traditional territories of many First Nations and First Peoples, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. As we gather here today, these nations continue to experience ongoing colonization and displacement, where land acknowledgements are offered in the place of land itself. As non-Indigenous residents of this land, it is our duty and our obligation to oppose and redress the historical and ongoing harms of settler colonialism on Indigenous communities here on Turtle Island, as well as the broader global systems of settler colonialism, such as the Israeli Settlers Project conducting an ongoing genocide on the Palestinian people to displace and replace them on their lands. So I thought I would do a quick, little introduction to this particular topic and then introduce our wonderful speakers. The Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions campaign has played an important role in creating a discursive space that exposes Israeli apartheid and gross violations of human rights that form the foundation of Brand Israel, and to create a broad transnational movement for solidarity with Palestine. So this panel will examine tools and tactics used by various divestment campaigns in various places and explore the contradictions and challenges that arise in each context with divestment strategies, and examine how to harness these tactics and strategies for radical, liberatory, and abolitionist resistance. And so I thought hard about exactly what I would like to say in order to maybe help situate this conversation today. And I thought I would probably perhaps contextualize this topic for the fight for divestment within the context, the broader context of a neoliberal takeover of public institutions, including Western post-secondary education institutions and public pension funds. So this is the fight where a lot of the divestment battles are happening. And the process of privatizing Canadian post-secondary education in many places around the world, not just Canada, also ushered in another structural change, which was the entry of private equity into Canadian universities. So in addition to tuition and government funding, many universities are now increasingly funded by huge endowments agglomerations of tax shelter donations that are invested to grow over time. And they may also run substantial pension funds to meet their faculty and staff pension obligations. Prior to the 1980s and 90s, virtually all universities and colleges in the West restricted their endowments and pension fund investments to domestic equities, bonds, and cash. But through subsequent decades, university endowment and pension funds would increasingly become financialized and transform themselves into large for-profit institutional investors. And this troubling intersection between high finance and high education has tremendously skewed the purpose and mission of universities and shifted priorities. The widespread introduction in Canada of private equity into university endowment and pension fund management was foreshadowed by its initial entry into broader public sector fund asset management. And this has been characterized by some scholars, such as Jamie Shilton, as financialized pension fund capitalism that adopts investment strategies consistent with private financial actors, but benefits from a type of public ownership veneer, and which build an invisible imperial privilege um, from people in the West, in the sense that their post-secondary education, their retirement literally is based increasingly in part on investments overseas, including investments in arms trades and military and defense and policing technologies. Of particular importance was the establishment in 1990 of the Ontario Teachers' Pension Plan, which has since then moved the entire landscape of pension fund management into higher risk, higher return investments, such as derivatives, private equity, venture capital, hedge funds, and real estate. And in around 2000, the transition of private equity was made by first movers in the university sector, including the University of Toronto, McGill, and the University of British Columbia. Commenting on the political impact of this financial shift in the context of higher education, Garrett Shishido Strain argues that by funneling money to hedge funds, public universities are incongruously supporting the anti-social policies hedge fund managers are notorious for rallying behind, rolling back corporate regulation, slashing the minimum wage, privatizing private schools, trammeling unions, cutting taxes for the wealthy, forcing broke nations further into insolvency and distressed debt, and of course, the military-industrial complex and the arms trade. And so in a very literal sense, the arms trade, military tech, investments in colonial projects are increasingly funding our retirement as Canadians, our educational sector, and which gives us a very specific position of complicity in the West, but also responsibility from which to act and opportunities as well. So then going back, I'd like to introduce our four amazing panelists. Enes Abdo Razek is the co-director of the Palestine Institute for Public Diplomacy and its digital platform Rabbit, an independent Palestinian organization focusing on advocating and campaigning for Palestinian liberation. Thank you for joining us today. Amina Ali is part of the Ontario Teachers' Pension Plan, OTPP divestment campaign, alongside other active and retired Ontario teachers of conscience. Vasanthi Venkatesh teaches at the Faculty of Law at University of Windsor, my colleague, and was a faculty advisor for the Palestinian Liberation Zone, whose student encampment and resistance led to the agreement recognizing anti-Palestinian racism, scholasticide, and genocide in Gaza, and boycott of institutional agreements, as well as a process for divestment. Vasanthi is a longtime organizer with liberation and migrant justice movements and works on social movements, borders, and resistance. And last but not least, we have with us Rachel Small, who works as the Canadian organizer for World Beyond War, a global grassroots organization and network working to abolish war and the military-industrial complex, and is a founding member of the Jews Say No to Genocide Coalition. a longtime organizer with the Mining and Justice Solidarity Network. She has done grassroots organizing within local and international social environmental justice movements for nearly 2 decades, with a special focus working in solidarity with communities harmed by Canadian extractive industry projects. So thank you so much, all of you, for joining us today. And let's start off with a question for all of the panel. Could you talk about the boycott, divestment, and sanctions work that you have been involved in, as well as some of the outcomes and some of the challenges and learnings from this process? And perhaps we could start with Ines.
Thank you, Vincent. Thank you to the faculty and for all of your work. Obviously, I want to start by having some thought altogether collectively for our people in Gaza. I think this is for our people in Gaza, our people in Palestine, this is why we are here. I think we're going to discuss a lot of important campaigns, but ultimately we are still in an ongoing genocide. This is a moment in history where, you know, we are in it. And I think it's been a very hard year. I think, you know, Palestinians were probably all very exhausted and feel sometimes deflated. And I think a lot of us can feel fatigue. I'm sure many people who are listening to us as well. But I think, you know, we are obviously very privileged among Palestinians here in Ramallah. And we're always thinking about our people in Gaza, in Jenin, in Tulkarem, who don't have a choice. They're living this every day and they need us to continue the fight. And so that's why we fight. That's why we continue. That's why we don't have a choice to, you know, surrender to basically the pressure, the extreme pressure that we all have to demobilize. So I think that's the first point. I think the fact that we are here, sometimes we feel, okay, you know, we're coming to discuss, we're coming to exchange. It might not seem much, but I think collective organizing, collective power, collective or mobilizing is extremely important, because that's how we build power, and that's how we will defeat settler colonialism, and that's how we will defeat, I think, the sheer and the growing repression that I think is coming your way, it's coming our way in different ways. So I think that's an important point I wanted to start with. So, you know, our organization, we're an organization that is basically embedded in the Palestinian civil society ecosystem. To be honest, we haven't been much focused on campus and universities divestment, which I think is very interesting because our approach is very complementary. But I think the first thing that we need to think about when we think about divestment and BDS is why are we doing it? I mean, BDS is not an end in itself. It's a strategic tactic. And I think right now what we're seeing is that clearly Israel will never end its colonial project. It will not stop. It is determined to continue unless there is a very you know, powerful pressure, powerful basically tools and tactics that are being used so that the balance of power can shift on the ground. I think it's very important because I'm sure a lot of the audience who are listening to us already know these things, but unfortunately we have way too many conversations still, especially with Western stakeholders and people involved, that continue to present this, you know, as a dispute between two people, as something that where we should dialogue with each other, where, you know, we should think of peace processes and so on. I think that's obviously a very dangerous path that's being driven our way to, you know, drive us to think about an Oslo 2.0, some basically some distractions to the real work that needs to happen, which is holding Israel accountable, which is undermining Zionism and undermining the Israeli settler colonial apartheid system. And so that's where I think, because there are different things that need to happen. There is one, we need to build Palestinian power. We need to build a Palestinian reunified political movement and political, I think, unified leadership and so on. But I think for that, obviously, what needs to happen in parallel is undermining Zionism in Israel internationally. Israel is relying on its international allies and sponsors, primarily the US, North America, and Western countries, but also Azerbaijan and others who are fueling the genocide and the military machine. So undermining basically international alliances of Israel are critical. The third thing is that we as Palestinians need to build alliances with like-minded people, with the indigenous people, with all of our allies that I think some of you have reminded of, Vincent. And so I think BDS is about how can we, break, I think, international alliances, international complicity with Israel. And I think this is also very important when we explain why we're trying to pressure Israel and why this is the first, this is our focus at the moment, is that internationally there is a lot that can be done to also remove the obstacles that are, think about us on the ground in order to organize politically, speak up, etc. The incarceration machine, the political prisoners, the intimidation, the surveillance, all of that is part, obviously, of the entire system we live in, and that prevents mobilization, that prevents organizing. And so this is internationally that you can work on that. And I think it's very important for the audience here and for you, because obviously it's about what you can do from your own perspective from outside. And I think this is the question that comes the most. It's people who say, what can I do? How can I help? People feel, helpless, but there's always a place of action that you can take, especially because if you're in the West, it's very likely that any of the institutions around you, whether it's your pension fund, your university, your insurance, your government, any of them are in one way or another, either using taxpayer money that goes directly or indirectly to Israel, or are invested directly or indirectly to Israeli interests. And so that's where I think there is a lot of opportunities, because I think strategically, we have to think about how can we strategically have big wins, strategic wins. The BDS movement is not new. It's been created in 2005, and I think there is multiple iterations of what the BDS movement is, what the different types of tactics are, what organizations involved in BDS are, from student campuses to big international NGOs. So there is a lot of I think different actors in that sphere. And so I think the focus has to be, in your place, what is the most strategic targets, and how can you collectively organize around these different strategic targets? So, speaking from your perspective, obviously, I think part of the big opportunity there is all of the university endowments and all of the university funds. And I think this is a critical target that I think the student movement in this past year has been amazing at picking up. And I must say that, from what I hear from Palestinians, from friends and families in Gaza, actually seeing people in the streets and seeing the students' encampment and seeing very small victories, silver linings happening here and there are extremely important, not just obviously to break and start breaking the Israeli hegemony, the Israeli economy, but also to lift up the morale and lift up, I think, hope for people who are losing hope, really, and are completely have a total uncertain future, are all traumatized and live in terrible conditions at the moment. That gives them hope that they're not left alone and that there are people fighting out there for them. So I think for these two aspects, it's really important. I think obviously we can boycott and we can divest from many things. And I think at the moment, right now, we are in a moment where we have to think about what's the most strategic. And I think that we're currently analyzing as well in different countries. Again, I've worked less in Canada, so right now we're focusing more on Latin America and Europe. I think what I think is critical is to also pull together our different resources to analyze where are the gaps, like what are the different supply chains and value chains, how do they work? And I think this is what we're trying to do in the energy sector and also in the arms sectors. We have comrades in the US really currently mapping out all of the supply chains and data from who produces what, where is it transported from, who transported to the Israeli ports and the Israeli regime, and basically where can we break that chain? Because I think it's again, being strategic means that sometimes we cannot go to the CEO of Valero, which is the US company that is producing the jet fuel that is going to Israeli jets that are bombing Gaza, because obviously they won't be the first one to move. However, we have been managing to block the boats that are transporting jet fuels to not stop in certain ports, to make the case more visible, so that there is international pressure from unions, dock workers, in order not to accept transporting this the weapons and the including jet fuel, etc. We're also looking at, for example, insurance, insurers. So if you have like a weapon or an energy supply or even a boat, who insures them? Can we pressure the insurers of these companies so that they lose their insurance? So I think it's about really making sure that we find what are the critical supply chains and value chains that are really hurting the Israeli military machine, the Israeli economic colonial economy. And second, where are the centers of power that we can shake? And that's what we're doing right now with the campaign for the energy embargo. And that's what many groups around the world are doing to pressure for arms embargo. So it's working in Spain, for example, with the government. But in other places, we're talking about, more of a unions organizing. So I think there is different approaches, and we were very successful in Colombia, where we managed to have the government, cut their coal exports. But this took a lot of efforts in terms of even the government understanding how they could do it. Because sometimes it's about understanding how the contracts work, the subsidiaries, the subcontracting with companies, what is the jurisdiction of the company versus the local authority or the government. And so I think all of that, we always need to study very well in order to have successful campaigning. And that's where I think it's a long process, but I can tell you that there are silver linings, and I will stop there. Israel has been suffering economically. They present themselves as the startup nations, but the startup sector has really lost investment. A lot of startups have had to relocate. The fuel production company of Israel, now their name escapes me, they have themselves announced that there's multiple boats that have refused to dock in Israel in the past year. Of course, they don't advertise about it, but it's actually on their website in terms of updates to their investors and markets. So there are silver linings that I think are important. And again, it might be just a few $1 million for you in terms of your pension fund or your local authority or your university, but it's extremely important to create precedents. We need to continue to create precedents to then have a snowball effect, and for institutions and allies to feel that they're not alone. Because that's why I also hear a lot, it's that people don't want to move, and be alone in the fight. So I think, we have to move in parallel collectively. And I think it's working. And I can tell you that economic pressure, if done strategically, will continue to do the damage needed. to stop the genocidal machine.
Thank you so much, Ines, for that wonderful overview. There's so many questions and so many important insights from that. I'll move over to Vasanthi.
Thank you so much, Vince, and thank you so much, Ines. It's so important for us to actually hear what people in Palestine are feeling about what we are doing over here, and that was really fantastic. So I want to talk a bit about the University of Windsor movement. So following a protracted 62-day encampment by the students, the University of Windsor distinguished itself as one of only 3 Canadian universities to reach a BDS-based agreement, but with the pro-Palestinian students. But it's also notable for being the most comprehensive, at least in North America, if not globally. And at the heart of this agreement, as with many of these agreements, lies a commitment to hold the university accountable for its financial investments through the lens of international law, human rights law, and domestic law. Now, as Vince and Ines both said, that how the basic strategy of the BDS campaign is to break the chinks of brand Israel, and also to expose the complicity of not only the Canadian and other Western states, but also the complicity of our universities and schools. But again, as Ines very powerfully said, that BDS is not the end in itself. And Laila Khaled reflected the same way years back when she said, BDS, of course, on the international level, it's very effective, but it doesn't liberate land. If there's BDS all over the world and the people are not resisting, there will be no change. But BDS helps us to continue the struggle to isolate Israel, and then the balance of forces changes there. So it's very important for us, she says, in the international level to have more people having campaigns, because it means the narration of our story, the Palestinian story, is now on that level. So the narration of the Palestinian story framed the students' campaign at University of Windsor. It was led by Palestinian and Arab Muslim students directly affected by the conflict and other community members. The student encampment, they designated their encampment as a liberation zone as opposed to an encampment, and it was a deliberate use of liberatory anti-colonial discourse, a strategic initiative where they thought that they would be to create this decolonial space by disrupting this whole hegemonic environment within the university, where the students and faculty and staff and community members who were involved and are involved in the movement are cast as threats. As one of the students says, our approach was informed by deep community engagement, fostering connections and educating others about Palestine through a radical resistance lens. This disruption of hegemonic space required a concerted effort to challenge and dismantle the pervasive structures of Western hyper-individualism, capitalism, and white supremacy, which we identified as foundational to Israeli exceptionalism and occupation. End quote. So the students' demands and actions were very prefigurative of a politics of decolonization and liberation. Importantly, they were steadfast in their refusal to allow any erasure of explicit mentions of the genocide, occupation, and Palestine itself. And we see that in the agreement. So I'm just going to share a few of the sections of the agreement. So as you can see here, the agreement, what's not mentioned here, it begins with an explicit acknowledgement of anti-Palestinian racism, but without the usual liberal juxtaposition of anti-Semitism in the same line. There is a section on support for scholars, including re-establishing institutional relationships with Palestinian universities. But importantly, item 4.3 explicitly talks about the scholasticide in Gaza, and not just Gaza, but also in Palestinian universities in East Jerusalem and West Bank. And there is in the concluding declaration, although it starts with a general condemnation of all violations of fundamental rights where they may occur, there is the action of Israel is specifically mentioned. And there has been such a there's been such a constant effort by the media and by politicians to remove any mentions of Israel and to point them out as the perpetrator. So this was very crucial for the students when they were negotiating this agreement, that occupation of Palestine be mentioned and the ongoing destruction in Gaza be mentioned, and that this is all being done by Israel. So you can see this agreement. It's on the website now. But the other part, which I haven't pasted here, is that there is a pivotal part was the implementation of an academic boycott against Israeli universities. And the language for that says that this academic boycott will remain in effect until the right of Palestinian self-determination has been realized, as determined by the United Nations. Again, very much centering Palestinian self-determination within even the context of the academic boycott of Israeli universities. And surprisingly, this clause has received the most backlash. But I want to talk about the divestment component, because it reveals the challenges both for the agreement as well as for the movement. So despite an insistence from the students' negotiator that we need an explicit prohibition on investing in companies that support the arms industry, and arms industry should be defined broadly, including all weapons and associated technologies. As reminded us that how technology has been used with to target Palestinians. The university refused that, and they only committed to revising its responsible investment policy to add a section on human rights, and which would be based on the UN's environmental, social, and governance, and the ESG principles. And they would just look at weapons companies. They would just look at weapons companies used in conflict zones. But it also had this section in the divestment policy, where again, as with the declaration, it identified Israel as the occupying power to be in serious violation of international law and human rights in the conduct of its occupation of Palestinian territory. So this was supposed to be the principle, the framework in which the responsible investment policy was supposed to be designed. The university came out with its amendments to its responsible investment policy about 10 days back. And if we see the changes, it's limited to just this. Okay, so it might seem great. So respect for human rights is fundamental in how the university conducts business and so on. But right at the first glance, you see that there is no mention of Israel, even though it was supposed to have been the founding principle of the amendments that were asked, or no mention of the UN bodies, no mention of occupation, no mention of any of those things that were demanded in the agreement. And the weapons section has been limited to just talking about controversial weapons, not the broad aspect of how weaponry has been used in Gaza and in Palestine in general. So there's already extensive scholarship actually critiquing the self-regulation based UN mechanism. As some people have labeled it as cuddly capitalism or greenwashing, where it only manages to divert the capital flows rather than achieving what we want as true divestment. And but nowhere is this more apparent than in this weapons industry investment. And as you all must have read, that in this in light of the Ukraine war, there is this whole language of just war and the right to self-defense being used and invoked by both Ukraine and Israel, and that weapons and associated multi-use technologies, including these AI surveillance systems, these drones which directly target children to kill them while they're injured, are now framed as enhancing democracy, as enhancing territorial integrity. And regarding Palestine, the other thing that I want to mention is that the prevailing compromise has been to restrict to restrict divestment to just companies listed in the UN Human Rights Council database that's involved in the settlements, but not about the complicity of all Israeli companies in the occupation. But these these amendments to the responsible investment policy do not even do that, because Palestine has been completely erased. The ethos of the fantastic agreement that the liberation zone students achieved has been basically shorn off all of its strengths. So now the way we are is that we have been trying to make an argument that, this controversial weapons, which is actually limited to just biological weapons, cluster bombs, and so on, is outdated, and it is especially so outdated given how the technologies of violence have changed to involve artificial intelligence, robotic technologies, and so on, and the use of what has been called the lethal autonomous weapon system, or LAWS. And this is really so critical, right, in the context of the ongoing genocide. I know, you must have heard of the system called Lavender, in which they framed around 37,000 Palestinian civilians as suspected militants so that drones could automatically target them. And it's an AI-supported genocide, or what people have called a domicide, because the AI has been used to create deliberate destruction of the entire land. And even though the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights has required ethical due diligence to at least include this idea of dual-use weapons, it has been very, very few investors, responsible investment policies have agreed to this, and even fewer universities have agreed to this. It was very hard for me to find any examples of policies where this dual-use weapons was even acknowledged. And I want to highlight two reasons for that, right? See, where tech companies, especially tech companies, are synonymously associated with these giant companies such as Google and Microsoft, they have integrated themselves so deeply into our lives that divesting from them, is constructed as being virtually impossible to even imagine, regardless of what they do. And they're able to simultaneously sell their technologies to the arms industry while greenwashing and claiming positive use for the same technologies. So they have ensured what in the US they call too big to fail, that they become too big to fail and too big to attack. And also brand Israel when it comes to technology. Israeli weapons companies like Rafael and almost all other companies, they manufacture their drones willfully kill children, but they're also used in Canadian farms right around the corner in Windsor to irrigate their land. The database tools that were created by the IDF, for the IDF, it forms the foundation for Ex Libris, which is a tool used for library cataloging in almost every Canadian university. So I want to go back to what Laila Khalid said, saying, when she asks, well, people will ask, why are they going for the BDS? But that's an experience. But as she points out, it's not something theoretical we are speaking about. The BDS during the apartheid era in South Africa, it helped the people who were holding arms. And it would not have been liberated if not for what's on the ground. And as Ines pointed out, in some ways, that remains the takeaway for the divestment movement, that it cannot be framed as, we cannot think about divestment for the sake of divestment because it's a limited tool, but that it's a tactic in this larger strategy that does not lose sight of the resistance by the community, by the Palestinians to build Palestinian powers. So yes, it is to attack and undermine brand Israel and make it a little bit costly for them while they're attempting to obliterate Palestine. It is to expose the imperialism and the colonialism embedded in liberal countries, in liberal laws, and of course, the financial institutions, and actually challenge this whole idea that this whole financial, capitalist, technological system is too big to fail. And I think what the agreement shows is that, what the UWindsor agreement shows, not what the administration has done subsequently, that it isn't too big to fail. And as the students keep saying that even if this is our equivalent of stones and sticks that we are throwing at it, we can do whatever we can for Palestine liberation and for a better counter-hegemonic world. So I'll stop here.
Thank you for your brilliant analysis, Vasanthi. Let's move over to Amina.
Hi, so thank you, Vince, and the organizers of this panel. Thank you, Inez and Vasanthi. So, as was already introduced, I am an Ontario teacher, and I am part of the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan divestment campaign. And currently, the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan, it's invested actually in a lot of different companies that are profiting from the apartheid system and also involved in the illegal settlements. So there's quite a lot of work that we have to do with our pension plan. But those of us that came together to start this divestment campaign, we decided to target weapons manufacturers. So that's what we've done when we came together in November of 2023. And the way the financial structure works is it seems that, every SEC filing shows, many different weapons companies. So for the most recent SEC filing, our pension is invested in Textron, Honeywell, and Northrop Grumman. But we've also been invested in Lockheed Martin, in RTX. I mean, there's just been a number of them. And so our position is, it's super obvious. It's an outrage, right? It's outrageous that as Ontario teachers, I mean, we devote our professional lives to the care and well-being of Ontario children. And so it's outrageous that we should be complicit and let alone profit, from crimes against humanity and from the deaths, 17,000 deaths of Palestinian children. And that's a modest a number as what the Lancet was projecting. So as a teacher, it's been harrowing actually to see that systematic obliteration of Gaza's education system, both in its infrastructure and its human resources. And over 625,000 school-aged children have been forced to miss an entire academic year, and with no prospect of resuming their education anytime soon. There's been hundreds of teachers, hundreds of students that have been killed. Schools have been targeted, deliberately targeted and destroyed by the Israeli military. And even the schools that have been repurposed as shelters to house internally displaced Gazans have been targeted. So we are outraged as teachers because our job is so contrary to what our investments are doing. And I would just like to share a quotation by the Palestinian British surgeon, the rector of the University of Glasgow University, Dr. Hassan Abu Sita. He says that those of us who have seen, smelt, and heard what the weapons of war do to a child's body by design, those of us who have amputated the unsalvageable limbs of wounded children can never have anything but the utmost disdain for all involved in the manufacture, design, and sale of these instruments of brutalism. The aim of weapons manufacturing is to destroy life and to ravage nature. In the arms industry, profits rise not only as a result of the resources captured in or through war, but through the process of destruction of all life, both human and environmental. And for us in this divestment campaign, as active and retired Ontario teachers of conscience, it's this quotation that most eloquently frames our outrage and our grief at our complicity in this genocide. And essentially, I as a professional, I have no professional, as an educator, I have no professional legitimacy, really, no professional, ethical, or cultural legitimacy as an educator if my pension is invested in these instruments of brutalism. that are designed to traumatize, maim, exterminate children, right? So these would be my students, and the Palestinian teachers would be my colleagues. And so it's unfathomable for us. And the irony is that, you know, as teachers here in Ontario, we often evoke social justice legacies of historical figures. And one that's quite popular in schools is Martin Luther King Jr. In fact, you'll see his posters, right? Decorating school hallways and classrooms. But his legacy is more than just institutional wallpaper. In his letter written from Birmingham jail, he confesses his disappointment in the moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice. And his caution is especially urgent for us today. It's our moral duty as teachers to refuse to be complicit in what the ICJ has called an illegal occupation, an apartheid system, and a genocide. And much like the pledge that World Beyond War is putting out, war and militarism don't make anyone safe. And it doesn't bring peace. And it only increases and creates intergenerational trauma and continues a cycle of violence. And as Mohammed Darwish so profoundly stated in his poem, The Prison Cell, the prison, both literal and metaphorical, doesn't just strip the captive of their freedom and self-determination, but also the one constructing the prison, the one funding the prison, and the one guarding the prisoner also loses their freedom and humanity. So, no, war and militarism doesn't make anyone safe. Apartheid doesn't make anyone safe. Genocide, an occupation doesn't make anyone safe. And so when a handful of us came together in November of 2023 to start this campaign, we realized that it would be a very long road. And we've learned a lot in this very devastating year, this horrifying year. But there have been small gains. But the most important thing is that our numbers as teachers of conscience is growing exponentially. So we partnered with World Beyond War in November, and I just want to extend my gratitude towards Rachel for her ongoing support for our efforts. And we started a letter writing campaign that was targeted towards members of the plan so that we could begin that pressure at that very base level of letters. We then expanded that strategy to Ontario taxpayers who are, through the Ministry of Education, involved in our pension plan. And then in April of 2024, we ended up shutting down our annual general meeting, the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan's annual general meeting at the Carlu here in Toronto. And I guess we made a significant impression such that the representatives of the board, our pension board, agreed to meet us in July. Our other efforts have included activating our unions to really push our unions' sense of courage. And we've had some small gains. So in June, there were a couple of locals, OSSTF locals, that's our secondary teachers union, who passed divestment motions. And that included the language Israel attacks on Gaza. And in August, ETT and ETFO, that's the elementary teachers union, also passed divestment motions. And in September, the Provincial Council of OSSTF passed a divestment motion. Now, this divestment motion is just generally about not investing in weapons manufacturers. So there is obviously still a long way to go for us to be able to make the connection between that and motions around saying no to apartheid and occupation, Israeli apartheid and occupation. But I think one thing to note is that what was behind that motion in September was a lot of pressure on the union. So the provincial would not have even passed that had there not been the pressure of this campaign. So that's a small gain for us. It's good feedback for us that we need to continue these efforts. And the fact of the matter is that both OSSTF and ATFO represent 140,000 members. So they've taken clear divestment positions, and we can really sort of organize and push from that point. So the union sent off their letters to our pension plan, and the pension plan came back with their justifications, which Vasanthi, you have already addressed. That one, they say that all their investments go through internal and in external processes, that they've got these third-party ESG research firms filtering their investments, and that they won't invest in, certain subsectors of defense, which is the cluster munitions, the anti-personnel landmines, biological and chemical weapons. And Vasanthi made a really good point to say that that's quite outdated, and those protocols need to be obviously updated to include AI and other more advanced modern forms of warfare. The third argument is, again, the same one that you stated, Vasanthi, is that they don't believe actually in a full exclusion of defense industry investments. And since those companies in their mindset are helping countries to support national security, and in their letter and also in their conversation with us in July with our meeting, they cite the case of Ukraine. So we do have, our work cut out for us, but we will just continue to push, right? I mean, to expose OTPP's incredibly compromised reputation, and they do care about their reputation. So we're pushing that strategy, that reputational risks outweigh the financial benefits, because there also has been precedent set. I mean, aside from divesting from tobacco companies, our plan recently, I think it was in 2019, divested from an unethical investment in one of the largest, in fact, private prison companies, Geo Group, that run immigration detention centers in California. So our pension divested, from that unethical investment because the reputational risks outweighed the financial benefits. But really, we do have a tremendous road ahead of us. I would like to just show the video now. This is our most recent action. And then I'll just talk very briefly about it and then end there. But Vince, if you could, por favor. So this was launched last week with the help of World Beyond War. Thanks to Rachel. I'm not hearing.
It's not sharing this sound. You have to close the share and then reopen it. Like stop sharing screen and then start again. And this time check share sound.
I'm a teacher. I am a teacher.
I have a duty to ensure the health, safety, and well-being
Of all students.
which is why I'm calling on the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan.
To divest.
From weapon companies who profit from the death of children.
The Ontario Teachers Pension Plan
Continues to invest in companies that
According to UN experts and the International Court of Justice
are complicit in war crimes
and crimes against humanity.
in Israel's attacks on Gaza and Lebanon.
Our pension plan invests in war crimes.
Ontario's teachers are refusing to be complicit in these crimes.
Through our unions,
representing over 140,000
elementary and secondary teachers,
We've called on the plan to divest from
from companies
selling weapons and technology
used to murder over 16,000 Palestinian children.
Joe Taylor, the OTPP president, has dismissed our demand.
And the explicit warnings of UN experts
by suggesting that these companies play an essential role in delivering returns to plan members.
We reject the idea that profit matters more than the lives of over 16,000 children. Every dollar you invest
in companies like Northrop Grumman, Honeywell, and Textron
fuels violence, not peace, goes to build bombs and destroy schools
and kill teachers.
Our students and their families
look to us to uphold our profession's ethical standards.
They expect us to stand for justice
and to honor human dignity.
So this is not simply a financial decision.
It's an ethical and professional one.
It's about our reputation and yours.
So divest.
Divest.
Divest from war.
Divest from war. Divest from war crimes.
Divest from war crimes.
Divest.
Divest.
Divest. Divest. Divest. Divest.
Divest.
So this is an example of our strategies, right? And it's twofold. It is to expose and shame our pension, and it is also to grow our courage as teachers. It's a tool because there are a lot of teachers out there who are scared. They are scared to speak out, and so this is acting as a tool to grow our collective courage to be able to speak out and to speak out boldly. And I do want to just say one thing, that the video does highlight a UN press release that came out on the 20th that is extremely clear about these financial institutions, the OTPP being one of them, that are investing in arms companies. And at the time they highlighted Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, and RTX, that these financial institutions are also to be called to account, not just the weapons manufacturers, for transferring arms to Israel, and that they could move from being directly linked to human rights abuses to contributing to them. So it's a direct violation of international human rights law, but also our own, Canada's own Crimes Against Humanity and War Crimes Act. So legal action, I think, I'm not a lawyer, but legal action, a class action, is another possible escalation, strategy against the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan. So I will end it there, and thank you so much for the opportunity to share our efforts and to be able to work in solidarity with all of you, and with you, Ines, as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amina, for sharing that powerful video and so much about your campaign. So we'll move now to Rachel Small.
Thank you. And yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm Rachel Small. I'm the kind organizer with World Beyond War. We're really a global grassroots movement made up of volunteers, activists, members, allied organizations, but all advocating for the abolition of war. Thanks to Amina for referencing our peace pledge that we invite people to join. Other folks I think we're at 197 countries and counting who have become members or have signed our peace pledge. So we invite you to join them at worldbeyondwar.org/pledge. Yeah, it's really an honor to be in the company of these incredible speakers and organizers and people who, I mean, as Ina said right off the top, it has been a horrific year of witnessing genocide every single day. Obviously, some people are experiencing it directly. Obviously, some people have lost family members. Our experiences of this genocide have not been anywhere near the same for all of us. But I think for all of us, it has been a horrific year. And it's just an honor to be in a space like this with people who are giving everything that they have to push back, to end this violence. And also with those who I know are tuning in live from schools across the country. This is really special. I myself am based in the woods, about halfway between Toronto and Ottawa, on land that's the ancestral territory of the Huron-Wendat, the Anishinaabe, the Mississauga peoples, covered by Treaty 20. And I guess I want to say, like, the foundational war of this country, of Canada, is, of course, one of colonization. And I think colonial violence, historic and present, is at the heart of everything we're talking about today, from Turtle Island to Palestine. So, in broad strokes, if we kind of look at the main ways that Canada is supporting Israel's genocide, I see them as sort of fitting into kind of three buckets. So there's military support, which includes like the weapons exports, but also the ways that the Canadian military has ongoing intelligence sharing and mission support for what Israel is doing. There's financial support, which includes everything from the Canada-Israel Free Trade Agreement to the investments that are made by our pension plan, by many different investment firms, et cetera, across the country. And then I would say the third bucket is maybe diplomacy. So looking at the ways that the Canadian government is or isn't voting at the UN, what the Canadian ambassadors and embassies are doing, what Canada is doing, on that kind of diplomatic stage. So World Beyond War starting, frankly, years ago, but especially in earnest a year ago, began to really dig into the military angle in earnest, and really to dig deep into the Canada-Israel arms trade. So much like Ines described right off the bat, I'll just share my screen here for you all. Hopefully you all can see that. This is the page worldbeyondwar.org/Canada Stop Arming Israel. Right off the bat, we became really digging into the various ways that weapons manufacturers in Canada are connected to arming Israel. So this is a map. You can't see all the points because there's many, many, many around every urban center in Canada. But these are all companies, either factories that are directly manufacturing parts or weaponry that are used by the IDF, or companies that are making parts that are being included in other weapon systems, or these are offices where decisions are being made that affect, again, what the Israeli war machine and the genocidal violence that is being carried out. So this is really from coast to coast, all across the country. We're constantly updating this. And almost right away, people began using this information to take direct action. So obviously, most of us can't boycott military companies as consumers, although, as has been mentioned, there are many dual-use items, and actually some of these companies also do make consumer products. But the vast majority are not companies that we are buying products from, but our governments and the Israeli military is. But we've been able to directly affect their operations with things like weapons blockades, direct actions. There's been sabotage actions. There's been pickets and protests. Literally hundreds of these actions at weapons manufacturers across the country over the past year. There's a listing here. You can click on any of these companies and get a bit more info about them. We've also included companies, as mentioned, like Amazon and Google, that do a lot of the computing that provide that aspect for the Israeli military. But I'm just scrolling down here to where you can see just a kind of endless scroll of just some examples of some of the mostly direct actions that folks have taken to interrupt, for example, the war minister at a keynote speech he was giving, to blockade weapons factories, to shut down rail lines, we literally projected this message onto the CN Tower in Toronto. This is not an edited image, this is a photo. It goes on and on, so I'll let you look at this in your own time. But just to say that people have been directly, as much as they can, putting their bodies in the way of these companies that are not just vaguely, but directly complicit in arming Israel. So on that note, I'm going to share a video we put together a few months ago to show some of that, because I think it's better than me talking about it.
Since Israel's latest assaults on Gaza began in October, Palestine solidarity organizers have zeroed in on Canada's arms trade with Israel as a key site of struggle. More than 50 companies have been identified across the country that manufacture weapons, components, and military technology for export to Israel. When confronted about this complicity, government officials misled the public.
And we have not emitted any new export permits since October 7th.
And we have sent, since October 7th, non-lethal equipment, including night vision goggles and protective gears. And that was through Canadian companies.
Canadian companies produce vital parts of the fighter jets, warships, drones, and attack helicopters that are decimating Gaza right now. In the span of 2 months, Canada approved more arms export permits for Israel than they had in any year for the past 3 decades. At the same time, Canada has been signing new contracts to purchase weapons and military equipment from Israel, directly funding Israel's war machine.
We want justice, you say how? We want justice, you say how? End the occupation now!
Communities across Canada have written, phoned, and petitioned our MPs.
Palestine will be free!
We have held teach-ins, community meetings, and town halls. We have flyered, marched, picketed, and rallied at every government office you can name.
We call on Mayor Olivia Chow to be an advocate for a two-way arms embargo on Israel.
This collective power forced the Trudeau government to promise to end the approval of new military export permits. But they have yet to formalize this policy or stop the flow of arms that they had already approved. A full arms embargo will stop the flow of all military goods, both to and from Israel. It will close the loophole that allows military goods to reach Israel untracked and unreported via the US. And it will stop the funneling of our tax dollars into Israel's military industry.
Not another nickel, not another dime. No more arms for genocide.
Movement pressure is working. But the government of Canada has refused to act decisively to save Palestinian lives and impose a full arms embargo on Israel. We've had no choice but to escalate. People of conscience from coast to coast are taking action to shut down ports, rails, highways, and weapons factories.
All three Harris! Shut it down! We will not, we will not let this go. Not yet.
Occupying their university campuses, disrupting the arteries of the economy, and forcing our government's hand to stop the flow of weapons, money, and legitimacy to the Israeli war machine. Let's do this.
So a lot has been happening across the country. I am kind of like brought to tears almost every day to see the ways that people are putting their bodies on the line, are directly everywhere they can trying to interrupt the flow of weapons to Israel. We quite soon after this video was launched, we launched a coalitional arms embargo now campaign across the country that saw hundreds of groups from the largest public unions in the country to the United Church, like the biggest religious groups, to the largest environmental organizations, associations, professional, really every type of group that you can imagine has signed on to this collective demand for a full two-way arms embargo on Israel. This is not a demand that we have invented. This is a sanction described on Global Affairs Canada's website. The government of Canada itself understands very clearly what an arms embargo is. It is something they have imposed on other countries in the past. And as was mentioned earlier, it does include dual-use items. So not just strictly military goods, but goods that are also used for military purposes and are being used in that way. Beyond getting about 400 different groups, big and small, to join onto this demand across the country, we also have had I believe 44 members of parliament to date sign on to that demand as well. So these are members of parliament, including from the Liberal Party, many from the Liberal Party, who have signed on to say, yes, this is exactly what Canada needs to do, impose a full arms embargo on Israel. And we've had a few victories towards that, where we have forced the government to do, what it was determined not to really cut back the Canada-Israel arms trade bit by bit and move one step closer to an arms embargo. However, it has not been fully implemented. What has happened is there basically are two main ways that Canadian weaponry gets to Israel. One is through direct exports straight from Canada to Israel. These are the ones that Global Affairs Canada gives a permit to. So they all have to receive a permit from the Canadian government. Melanie Joly made a big announcement a few months ago that she was suspending 30 of those permits. This is a win. It would never have happened without us fighting tooth and nail for it, but it's only about 12% of the active permits. They made it seem like they had canceled all permits when they announced 30 permits. Unfortunately, there are over 200 active permits. Nonetheless, Israeli media freaked out about this. People on the global scale, it made a big impact that Canada was cutting down some permits, but we have a long way to go. The other way Canadian weapons get to Israel is indirectly through the US, and they don't even require a permit to do that because of an agreement that Canada and the US have to share military equipment. So what that means is that, for example, hundreds of Canadian producers make products for the F-35, which is Israel's most advanced warplane. This is often the one that is dropping those 2,000-pound bombs that we have seen and that others have referenced. And they are being sent straight from Canada to the US, built into the F-35s that are then shipped to Israel. And this is not tracked and this is not reported, and Canada has not cut off that flow of weaponry. What they have done is where we raised the stink about a particular shipment of explosives to be made by a General Dynamics factory in Quebec and sent to the US. It was kind of by fluke that we found out about that planned shipment. We found out about it, we made a huge stink, and the Canadian government promised to cancel it. What they didn't do, though, is actually address the bigger issue that there's this huge loophole that all these Canadian weapons can get to Israel via the US. So I know we don't have really much time. So I just maybe want to end by saying that we have a long way to go, but we have forced the government to move in ways that would have been unthinkable a year, 2 years ago. And it's because of the types of actions that everyone on this call has been talking about. It's because of the labor organizers who've been organizing within their union, because of the lawsuits that have been filed suing the federal government for not following their own arms exports laws. It's because of the incredible direct actions, the weapons factories whose shifts have been shut down by hundreds of people blocking their gates. It's because of the research, the hundreds of hours in very boring spreadsheets of research behind the scenes that maps out the flow of weaponry. And it's really because of what everyone's doing here. And I wanted to make just one very, very quick final pitch for a big countrywide day of action that the Arms Embargo Now campaign is coordinating this Saturday. We're having an F-35 day of action specifically with protests at factories across the country that are part of the Canadian supply chain. So as you can see, these are some of the actions happening all across the country. And we also put together a map that shows all of the places we know about where F-35 parts are being made in Canada that go to the US and then end up in the Israeli jets. So I would encourage everyone to go to armsembargonow.ca/F35, find an action near you and go there this Saturday so that you can be part of disrupting the supply chain. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And I know we're bumping up on time, but I thought I would leave the final word maybe for Ines in terms of just wrapping this up and talking about, kind of where we might go from here.
I feel just like saying thank you. I mean, it's all of your courage. It takes a lot of, courage, energy, effort. So really thank you for your amazing campaigns. I think these are that I learned a lot. And I think, we what we can do is really, I think, disseminate and exchange all of that information, knowledge, experience, because all of these different campaigns are so important on so many different levels. I think, you're so brave as a teacher, Amina, and to bring, your community around. I think that's the type of grassroots campaign that really can impact. And really, wow, like Rachel, like your the amount of research, of organizing, and so well organized that I can see is going, to these nationwide efforts. And Vasanti, the same, because you're also really targeting a very specific objective with your university's policy and practice. So I think do continue. And I think, all what we can do is, I think, bring together our different networks, resources, existing things, so that we don't always have to reinvent the wheel each other. I think that's how we build power, is that we, all of us build the building block, and we make sure we know how to find each other so that we can use each other's strengths. So thank you very much. And I think this is just the beginning. It's just the first conversation, at least to me. So yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
I would say.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ines. So with that, I think we'll bring this wonderful panel to an end. And I know that next we have poetry from Sarah Malik happening at 10:50. And so thank you once again to all of our incredible speakers, Ines, Amina, Vasanti, and Rachel. Thank you so much for the Scholar Strike folks, Alessandra, Beverly, and others who have put this together. And see you all soon.